Welcome back to the Glen Alex Show. I am your host, Glen Alex, and each episode of the Glen Alex Show focuses on a different aspect of health because you are whole and all of you matter. And I am on a mission to help you be joyful, connected, confident, and complete the life experience I call Wellth, Wellth, which is wealth plus other riches. And this episode of the Glen Alex Show is about the importance of self care. Before we jump into it, though, please subscribe so you never miss an episode of The Glen Alex Show and drop a comment so I'll know what's on your mind. Thank you.
Where your health matters, set your mind, let it flow. Joyful, connected, confident, complete. Let Glen Alex help you back on your feet. The Glen Alex Show.
Please help me welcome my guest, Dr. Matthew Campbell, who is a clinical psychologist who helps people build sustainable self-care without burnout or guilt. He focuses on why motivation fades and why people struggle to stay consistent and how simple structure, rather than perfection, supports mental and physical well-being. Dr. Campbell is the co-creator of our Primal 5, a framework centered on 5 foundational areas of health: sleep, sunlight, movement, social connection, and consumption. His work helps people feel better first, so change becomes possible. Dr. Campbell, welcome to the Glen Alex Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get to talk.
Me too. Thank you so much for making time. When I came across your profile on Podmatch, I'm like, yeah, I've got to talk to him because self-care for me is a cornerstone of health and well-being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that if we can focus on the essentials with self-care and keep it there, then we can really help ourselves and others.
Okay, okay. Well, first tell us what led you to this work.
Well, I've been in clinical work, worked with clients for over 20 years. And what I found again and again, what had to do with how depleted my clients were. And so while people would have any number of symptoms, people have any number of symptoms that they deal with so consistently, I was noting the depletion, the lack of engagement in some very basic aspects of human functioning. As you mentioned, sunlight, movement, sleep, meaningful connection with others, and what we put in our minds and bodies was often leading to worsened or actually sometimes even seemingly causing a lot of distress.
Okay, okay. Well, life is busy these days. Parents seem to have 2 or 3 full-time jobs with their own work, raising kids and taking the kids to and from their activities. A mother said to me recently that taking 5 minutes to breathe was selfish. Address her. Address that
Yes,
unrealistic ideal that
yes.
self-care is selfish.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. Of course, if we don't do those things, then, for example, the woman that you're mentioning, she's talking about her children. She's talking about, juggling all this. She's not going to be able to do that as effectively
Mhm.
if she doesn't take care of these things. And so, like so much in our lives, so much in your work and my work, we're trying to help people to recognize that health will occur when we're focused less on the immediate and more in the long term. And so in the immediate, absolutely, it feels like we don't have that 5 minutes to breathe, and that's selfish because I have these things to do. In the long term,
Mhm.
you are going to be so much more useful to those things, your children, to things you care about, and you're going to feel better.
Okay. Well, as you were speaking and talking about the long term versus the immediate gratification feedback, it reminded me of clients who are not motivated in the moment
Yes.
to do something. And my personal take on motivation is it is the end goal that you're after, not the immediate satisfaction or energy or inertia to do something. What's your take on that? How do you define motivation?
Motivation is lovely. It's wonderful. It doesn't last. And so I think that so often where one of the reasons behavior change is so difficult is that we want to feel like doing it. And that's fantastic. That is so great when it happens, and that makes it easier. But where real meaningful change occurs is when we do the healthy thing, even when we don't feel like it.
Mhm.
So if we rely on motivation, we're going to be in trouble. And so let's use the most easy, obvious, often humorous example, a New Year's resolution. Someone makes a New Year's resolution. They're excited about it. They're happy to be trying to help themselves get healthier in some way. Well, that's great for a week. But that's why so many of them fail after a week, because when the feeling, when the excitement fades, then all of a sudden other things get in the way and we don't keep them. We're not going to feel like doing it all the time. Health is when we do it, regardless of how we feel.
Okay. So motivation in that way is irrelevant if you
Well, I
know,
think it's fantastic.
okay. If it's
I
not
think
there
it's
though.
fantastic. Make it short term is one of the best things that we can do.
Okay.
Create short term goals. Shorter term goals
Mm,
we can are more attainable. And then the
okay.
other part is be realistic. Perfection is not the goal. It's unattainable, and it's not the goal. And what we're trying to do, break things down into smaller parts, recognize that we're all going to slip. Another major roadblock to behavior change is that we perceive if we slip or if we plateau, then we've failed, then it's no good. Back to, we're back to square one. And that is so untrue.
Mhm.
It is inevitable in behavior change that we're going to slip. It's inevitable that things are going to level out for a while. The key is that we just stick with it. We have
Okay.
grace and for ourselves and we stay with it. And that gives us that opportunity.
Okay. Okay. That works for me. Now, you mentioned earlier that your clients, you noticed that your clients were depleted. Can you
Yes.
just drive home the point about how important self-care is for mental and overall health?
I absolutely can. And so just as a brief explanation is that the self-care approach that I am so passionate about has to do with what did our ancestors do? What were our bodies made to do? We live
Okay.
in a world that makes doing those so much more difficult because we have so many choices. There are so many, easy buttons, but those are short term. They're not going to fulfill us in the long term. So the depletion comes from, for our sleep, our emotional tolerance is much worse, and our impulse control and our focus are all much worse with a lack of sleep, with great fatigue. If we don't move our bodies, that's a major it's a great stress management technique. And further, we know that exercise can be equivalent to antidepressants. So we know the benefits on our mood. The isolation, loneliness, it's an epidemic. There's a white paper on this. It's so profoundly essential that we have that human connection. We're pack animals. And then, the consumption part, that's our fuel. You know, what we put in our minds and bodies, that's what fuels us. And so, you know, that's going to be an unstable energy source. And so we're more likely to bounce around a good bit emotionally when we're not good using good fuel through what we consume.
Okay. Okay. How did you settle on the Primal Five?
Well, it came, you know, it was actually something you're very familiar with. It was through intake evaluations. And when we go through the intake, the areas of our intake interviews, I
Okay.
kept noticing this pattern that of these five things, there would almost, well, inevitably there would be two that were off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often it would be more than that. And I think that it's sometimes it's even dependent on the client's age. You know, like particularly for our younger clients these days. I mean, it's, you know, they're growing up in a difficult time,
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of they have so many choices. They have computers in their hands. They grew up with computers in their hands that are addictive. And they get judged a lot for that, but that's all they've known.
Mm-hmm.
And those things can really get a hold of us. So, but you know, but it can be different for different people. But the numbers, you know, Glenn, the numbers are overwhelming. And I actually have them over here, but just research estimates, you know, that 50 to 70% of people, their sleep is impaired. About half of people, you know, are experiencing loneliness. Exercise and poor diet is 70 to 80%. Half of people aren't getting good, you know, exposure to the sun. And it goes on and on. Excessive screen time, of course, is over 70%. So there's these things that are so essential and simple, but we find them hard to do.
Very simple, very simple. But do you find that um, in this age of technology, maybe particularly for the younger folks, that um, their issues with the Primal Five are more about um, getting sunlight, getting out of the building, away from the computer, moving, getting physical activity in, and the socialization? Do you
I
find
think
those
you're
impact the
hitting,
younger people more?
I think what you're pointing out is really a great point and a real important aspect that can go either way with these primal five. And what that is they're so interconnected. And as you're saying, if I'm spending a great deal of time on a screen, what am I not doing? I'm not outside. You know, I'm not having, you know, in-person human contact. You know, I'm not moving my body. I'm not doing all of these things. And so they are so interconnected. The good thing is that it can go the other way too. You know, we can try to find a, you know, a friend or a few friends to go, you know, walk together in the morning time, you know, so we get sunlight and social engagement and moving our bodies. We can do all of these together. So it does, like for the mom who doesn't have that 5 minutes to breathe, hey, we call that stacking, you know, put them together.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be just these isolated things. I missed your
Okay.
point. I missed addressing specifically what you were saying though, and that has to do with the phones, with the teenagers and such. And it's we know it's the data is really overwhelming on this, particularly teenagers. When they get over 2 hours of screen time, it's that's the critical juncture. That's when the data suggests that real problems come about.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. How do you see boundaries playing into healthy self-care?
I think it's a lot like what you mentioned. I keep coming back to your client that you mentioned, but it's the boundaries of if I don't take care of myself, you know, is that the idea is that I'm being selfish, you know, these basic essential things I need. Well, that's me. That's my boundary. That is what is mine. I mean, that's the essence of boundaries is what's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. We'll respect that, and manage those. Well, what's mine is I have got to take care of myself for myself and to engage in my valued behavior. And if I don't do that, all of it will suffer.
Okay. I like the way you put that. I do like the way you put that. Now, I know you have a workbook available, so without giving it away, can
Mhm.
you just offer maybe one tip for each Primal Five element or of
Oh,
how to
absolutely.
engage in it?
Absolutely. And part of it also that I would encourage people to do is trying to think through these five and trying to think through where am I good? And then where do I have challenges and difficulties in terms of how important they are? For getting outside, I think that is something that really what we want to try to do. The ideal aspect or part of that is get out in the morning.
Okay.
Morning sunlight is the key. I mean, or it's the ideal. It helps us so much because it helps us not only with that vitamin D, with that sun exposure we need, it also sets our circadian rhythm. And so it's going to help with our sleep at
Okay.
night.
Okay.
When we talk about sleep, sleep is something, and I won't get into kind of the nerdy part of it, but basically, the more structure you have around sleep, the better. People a lot of times talk about going to bed at the same time, which is true. Waking, waking at the same time is also really important because we're training our body that this is the time for sleep. When we talk about exercise, exercise is something I really think we get wrong a lot because exercise doesn't mean, that I'm doing an Ironman. It doesn't mean, that I'm going to extremes as we have a tendency to do. Walk is wonderful.
Hmm.
Walking is wonderful. Or find a few minutes within each day. Throughout our day, let's just find a few minutes. Maybe we're at the office. Let's walk around. Let's do some stairs, for a few minutes and then go back. It doesn't have to be an elaborate workout plan.
Okay.
Connection. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second. Um, I do tell my clients and even family and friends to reframe exercise to
Mm.
activity or just movement because it's not about sweating out in the gym and looking at all the beautiful people, which is a deterrent for a lot of folks. So
Yeah.
I like the way you put that. It's just move a little bit and you can do a little bit here and there throughout the day. So
Yeah.
I like that. Now, just going back to sleep for a moment,
Yes.
you mentioned waking at the same time every day. Does that include off days? Because most like to sleep in.
It's, you know, Glenn, that is such a great question because I think it leads us to something that's really important is that, there are some people, and I love it for you all that sleep is so easy for you, and I really love that for you all. Some of us it's more of a challenge. And so for those of us it's a challenge, sticking with sleep management techniques is much, much more important.
Okay.
And because we really need to take care of our sleep and we really need to be intentional with it. And that it's not going to be the same. Now, that being said, we want to make sure we're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But some of these things and these techniques and helping to condition ourselves, they are more important for those of us who find sleep more of a challenge.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So you were moving on to consumption?
Well, it's social connection and
Okay.
having that connection with others. And that's something when we talk about connection, the key part of it is the quality. is that we're focused. We're not focused. It doesn't have to be quantity. It doesn't need to, we don't need to be the life of the party. We don't need to be around people all the time. It's having a healthy relationship where we're listening to each other, we're attending to each other. It's reciprocal or back and forth. There's a
Hmm.
caring aspect to it. That's what we're talking about. It
Okay.
doesn't need to be hours. That's wonderful if it can be, but it doesn't need to be. It's just
Okay.
we're humans. We're meant to be connected. Consumption, Glenn, I respect your time too much because I could go on forever on consumption. But the more we consume things that come from the earth and that that walked on, grew in, swam in, the earth, the better we're going to be in terms of that. The more we're making sure we're getting water in our bodies, um, the better. But then also, the mental consumption these days has become so much more of an issue. We talk about social media, and it is tremendously important, but we also need to focus on, watching out for excessive news consumption, media consumption. We're, the human animal, like we were made to know what was going on in our village and those around us. We are inundated with information that's often going to focus on the very primal aspects, things that will create our focus on them, our clicks, or what have you. It
Okay.
doesn't have to really be accurate oftentimes or really the full truth, but it's just trying to engage us. The other thing that I just wanted to put in there because it's so important. The other thing that is I
Absolutely.
don't think we talk about enough is pornography. And I think that, I think it's kind of a taboo thing oftentimes, and we don't. But these are by far the most viewed websites on the internet. And it's something that can be very problematic. And this is not from like a morality point of view or anything like that. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm just coming from the data and that it can really affect people's perceptions of others. It can really, impact it. We're not made for constant sexual imagery. That's just not what we're made for.
Okay.
And like most things, when we do things that these bodies of ours aren't made for, there's going to be consequences.
Okay. So how do you recommend someone manage consuming the news and social media and the porn?
Well, I think that a lot of it are time limits. Like one of the tricky things about the news is we're taught we want to be an informed populace. We want to have an informed opinion, and I agree. But that doesn't mean we need to spend an hour watching or scrolling through news stories. 15 minutes, we're going to be able to get enough for the majority. We're going to be able to do it in 15 minutes. And at most, maybe we do 15 minutes in the morning and the evening. I think that's probably overboard, but that's what we do. And we really want to try to find, it's kind of a sign of the times that we have to find unbiased news sources or news sources with limited bias. I did a search myself. I have a few emails that I'll get every morning that just try to give me the facts, or
Mhm.
I have sought because they're just fact based, or I'm biased towards BBC. And I try to find things that I feel like give me a relatively objective perspective, and I don't look at them too long. And then
I
of course social.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
I practice that as well. I will limit myself to the news in the morning and
Hmm.
I don't want to watch it closer to bedtime. I did that for a while and I found it weighing on me. So it was actually a 5-year period where I didn't watch the news at all and I was golden. And then I got back into it because things kept
Yeah,
happening. So
sure.
I totally agree with limiting your exposure to these things. And they're repetitive too. So you really don't need to follow these things multiple times in a day or even every day because they repeat the same stuff. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, I agree with that. And I also agree with you about the facts. Just what was that Dragnet? Was that the TV show?
That's right, Joe
Just the
Friday.
facts, ma'am. Yes, yes. Because I get annoyed when there's rhetoric. I don't want to hear your opinion. Just give me the
Right?
information and let me form my own. So
That's right.
I like that, limiting the time limits. Yeah, and the number of times you expose yourself to those things are very helpful.
Yes, yes. And they, like most of the things, and I know something that you and I are very like-minded about is that that's not always what we feel like doing. But when we are living in a healthy way, then our behavior leads our emotions. In other words, you
Mm.
do things that are healthy and then you feel better afterwards. Your feeling is a result of those choices. We get into trouble when the feeling directs the behavior. In other words, when we're just following the way we feel, we're going to be in trouble.
And does that align with what you said about motivation? Because I want to feel healthy before I do the thing.
Absolutely. That they're really one and the same,
Okay.
is that if I am conscious that the feelings that I desire and then being stable and more consistent, those occur because I behave in certain ways. I have certain habits and routines. And that's really the kind of feelings and experiences we want are a result of behavior first, emotion second.
Okay. And then as you engage in that pattern, um, you can repeat it just by
That's,
repeating the behavior. You can
well, and we've
duplicate the
then it's
experience.
yes, I think you said something very much along these lines that I really agree with. We will actually start feeling like doing it after it becomes, we do the behaviors and we do them repetitively, and then we do feel more and more like doing them.
Hmm.
And so it's a little bit, on the side, kind of putting on its side the way we typically would like for it to occur with the feeling like doing the healthy thing. But when we do the behavior, ultimately the feeling of doing it will happen.
Okay. Okay. Now, as people are engaging in the change process, I know in your workbook you go through some tips, you like four warnings. This is what you can expect. And the
Right?
ones that stood out for me were replacement,
Yes.
discomfort, start where you are in progress. Those are very key tips for me. Can you just run through them?
Well, absolutely, absolutely, and you may need to help me with the ones that you mentioned, but one of them that you said is discomfort. Um, Discomfort is part of change. Discomfort is part of change, and a lot of times when we feel uncomfortable, we'll perceive that means something's the matter.
Hmm.
Well, I always use the example of exercise. If you walk into a gym and let's say you've got this certain exercise program, that's what you're choosing to do. If you walk out of the gym feeling exactly the same way you did as when you walked into the gym, what does that tell you? You probably didn't do anything, right? Because that sweat we feel, the muscle fatigue, right? Out of breath, whatever, that tells us that we changed something, we pushed ourselves. Discomfort is part of change. But a lot of times, if something makes us uncomfortable, our read on that is, well, something's the matter, right? Like I'm uncomfortable, or I'm nervous or this or that. And no, if we're moving towards something healthy, we need to recognize that growth involves discomfort.
Okay,
And so, that is, that's part of the deal.
absolutely,
And keep them
absolutely.
reminded.
Well, um, progress, what progress is.
Absolutely is we are trying to get better. We are trying to improve things. And so let's use the example of eating. Eating is something trying to eat cleanly. Um, if we tend to eat a lot of processed foods, then progress would be, hey, I'm going to try to make sure I eat one clean meal a day, right?
Okay.
I'm trying to improve and make progress. If my focus is always on the end result, I'm setting myself up for failure,
Okay.
right? And so I'm just trying to set short-term goals for myself. I want to allow for my humanity that we are imperfect creatures and we will make mistakes, and that's okay. We just try to get back up and get after it again. It's okay. But the focus is on progress and definitely not on perfection.
Okay. Okay. How about you start where you are?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a professor in college, grad school, he called it the zone of proximal development. And it always stuck with me because it made me feel smart to say it, I think. But that's what it is start where you are. Just let yourself be where you are. And you are your measuring stick. That is the key.
But I should be there already.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Right. Or what we think other people are, right? Our
Yes.
perception of other people. You are right where you are, and all we're focused on is trying to get better.
Okay. Okay. Replacement.
Replacements are huge. Replacement behaviors are really, really big. Uh, One of the ways that I describe this is we can't not do something. We can't not do something, right? We can do something else.
Okay.
And it's really important to, when someone says, like, for example, if I ask a client when they come in, like, what are you looking for? Oftentimes, understandably, they'll say to not feel as anxious, to not feel as sad. And I get it. Of course, that is something they want, but that's not ultimately what we want to work on. We want to work
Right.
on what they do want rather than what they don't want.
Yeah.
And so replacements are, for example, an easier example of that is I eat a lot of processed food. Well, what's the thing about processed food? They have that sugar, that highly rewarding sugar for us as humans. So I'm going to eat less of those, fewer, of those Skittles. I'm going to have an apple. I'm
Yeah.
going to have something that has more, something more natural, in it. I am going to, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to find what does this thing do for me? Whatever this behavior is I'm wanting to change, what does it do for me? And I'm going to try to do something healthier that kind of fits the same
Okay.
role of what that does for me. And so, if sometimes I can even be social, is that, people will look at this social media and I know better what other people are doing and things like that. And maybe we could do something radical like give them a call, or have a meal with them.
You mean actually
Um,
speak to someone?
I've heard that it's something you can do. Yes. Yes. I read
Just
that
text.
somewhere.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. So self-care for you and for me as well, just make sure I understand, is the foundation
Yes.
of mental and overall health.
Yes. And
Okay.
it's about, I'm it's a passion of mine, and I think that spa treatments, I think that massages, I think that vacations are wonderful,
Mhm.
right? But
Right.
when I talk about self-care, I'm talking about the basics. I'm talking about taking care of what the human was made to do, right? I think that when you mention, indulgence and things like that, I think that's because people so often, when they think self-care, they think some of these other things. Again, those are wonderful if you can do them and such, but that's not the self-care I'm talking about. That's not
Right.
what I think of as self-care.
Okay. And I like that the Primal 5 is straightforward
Mhm.
and it's doable, and it's something that can be done every day. Well, sunlight if weather allows.
Sure.
But it is definitely doable and within each adult's realm of control.
Oh, I love what you just said. I love it so much because you just said something to me that's so important about this is we live in a world where there's so many things that affect us that we don't have control over. And what we have here, what I'm trying to encourage are things that are really impactful in our lives, and we have the control over these.
Mhm.
And so let's get after it. So we've tried to create this structured approach, to help ourselves of structure and looking at progress, not perfection. We've tried to, you mentioned some of the behavior change techniques, that we're trying to
Mhm.
encourage along the way.
Okay, okay, okay. Can you give us a brief overview of the workbook?
Absolutely. Um, the workbook goes over, it describes the basic ideas, the principles, the reasoning, kind of this aspect of attending to that and the human that our ancestors, the way when our bodies came to be what they are, what were our ancestors doing? And it goes over the fact that, for our ancestors doing these things, they didn't have a choice. You know, they didn't have a choice. This was just their life. Now we live in a time where we really have to make choices, and people are very judgy and, oh, well, they're lazy and so on and so forth. I don't have time for that because it's the recognition it's more difficult for us to do these things right now. Like we really have to be intentional
Mhm.
in taking care of these things. And so to me, it's important to first of all understand, a problem. Okay, that's the challenge, but now let's get after it.
Right.
Just understanding it. No, we're not getting anywhere if we're just saying the why. Now we need to get after it to make it better. And
Okay.
so, yeah, so it goes over that basis. Then it goes over a bunch of behavior change suggestions or techniques or expectations, things to expect for yourself. And then week by week, we go over one of these areas. We start with sun exposure, we go to sleep, then we go to movement, social connection, and consumption. So each of the 5 weeks is spent on one of these areas, and we're just trying to build them up um,
Okay.
in a very reasonable and structured way.
Okay. I mean, it sounds wonderful. I do have the workbook, so I will go through it myself. And
Fantastic.
I hope it takes off because it is simple and it's necessary.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a passion. When I was thinking of doing this, Glenn, over the years, I've written down and written different things that I notice clients that I work with, just as humans, things that we struggle with and issues and topics. But I asked myself, if I just do one thing, write one thing that I think had the potential to be the most beneficial for people, what would it be? And this was it. It's simple, but it is again just these things really affect the quality of our lives.
Oh, they absolutely matter. So thank you for your work. Now, do you see clients in person, virtually,
I see clients in
in person?
person
Okay.
therapy.
Okay.
I'm not as good. I'm not very good, I don't think, on the the virtual. That is not a strength. It's knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and that is not a strength of mine. So I see
Okay.
people in person.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, do you have any other projects or books that you want to share with us?
Well, we have this book and of course our website, our Primal 5, and we are on the cusp of releasing an app.
Okay.
that is along the same lines and it's kind of in practice trying to help people monitor things and recognize where they're hitting the mark and where we might could improve with recommendations along the way.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Please keep me in the loop.
Absolutely. I would love
Okay.
to.
Okay. Now, I know there's a lot to self-care. If you can, what is the
Mhm.
one nugget or takeaway you want the audience to have?
Respect the way we're made.
Mhm.
Respect the way we're made. Appreciate that we have these big brains. We have these big brains and there are things that are very special and unique about us as humans. But at the end of the day, our bodies were made for certain things.
Okay.
And we can't outthink that. We cannot treat ourselves as anything other than what we are, which is a creature that walks on this earth with bodies that were made to do certain things.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good to me. Dr. Matt, I mean Matt, you don't want me to call you doctor.
I like Matt. Yes.
Okay, Matt. Thank you so much for your time, your work, and for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Please take care. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of the Glen Alex Show. We hope you learned the importance of self-care, how it will enhance your overall health and well-being, including your mental health. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode.
Refresh your spirit with a nourishing thought.
Please allow me to leave you with this nourishing thought. Katie Reed said, self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. And Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. When it comes to mental health and overall health, self-care is non-negotiable. Healthy self-care is not indulgence. It provides a solid foundation from which you can develop and share your innate gifts and talents, and for you to experience authentic love and joy. Healthy self care is not indulgent, nor is it about spending lots of money on spas or fads. Healthy self care involves getting good sleep, engaging in mindfulness, getting movement, being social, honest self reflection, intentional consumption, and setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. All of these actions help reduce stress, improve mood, repel depression and anxiety, apply learning, and enhance your relationships and overall well being. Self care is not selfish. It is an act of health, a revolutionary act of health for yourself, which positively impacts yourself, your loved ones, your community, and ultimately society. For specific tips to elevate your self care, connect with today's guest. Check out my tips on the January episode of The Glen Alex Show. Book your free consultation with me and order my books, Living in Total Health and Living Boundaries, from glenalex.com. Then stay tuned for the next episode of The Glen Alex Show. And until next time, be well.